Well, it clearly is if you define election interference as the undue participation in an electoral process uh, uh, designed to undermine the will of the people. He's not a communist. I suppose reasonable people could disagree about that, but that's what he identifies as. He's competing for some of the working class people that Donald Trump thinks are his natural constituency. The MAGA brigade tends to be working class, marginalized economically. And so there's that going on. There may well be, I try not to get too deep into Donald Trump's mind. I don't want to occupy that space, but there may well be some racist and other sorts of prejudice, religious prejudice at work there as well.
Let's put those questions to our guests. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Professor Andrew Latham. He's a professor of political science at Malacalester College. He joins us live from Minnesota in the US. Professor Latham, thanks for joining me on the show tonight. Donald Trump tells New Yorkers, you have no choice but to vote for Cuomo. If Zohran Mamdani wins, I will not be sending any federal funds to New York City. And then Andrew Cuomo adds, well, if I don't win, Donald Trump will send federal troops to New York. My question is pretty simple. Isn't this election interference?
Well, it clearly is if you define election interference as the undue participation in an electoral process uh, uh, designed to undermine the will of the people. This is clearly unprecedented. Endorsements are normal. I'm in favor of this candidate, I'm opposed to that candidate. But this one comes with a stick attached to it. If you do this, then I will punish you by withholding funds. It is, by any metric, by any measure, it is interference, not foreign interference, which Americans are often a little bit paranoid about, but domestic coercion might be a better term for it. Unacceptable in a flourishing democracy.
Unacceptable coercion and interference in a flourishing democracy. Many Americans in the recent past, I'm sure you're aware, Professor Latham, have actually questioned the very foundation of American democracy and wondered if it is indeed flourishing, given the number of attacks that have been mounted by the Trump administration on the country's democracy. But talking specifically about this election, first and foremost, what is it about Zohran Mamdani that terrifies Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd so much, according to you? Also, why is a mayoral election, though of course this is the financial capital of the world that we're talking about, it's not just any city, but why is the New York mayoral election becoming a microcosm of American politics itself?
Yeah, good questions. To go to the latter question first, I think New York is simply looms large in the American political imagination. Donald Trump is from there as well. He grew up there, lived there for most of his life. So it's not just any other big metropolitan area. What goes on in New York registers nationally as well. And what we see happening there is Mamdani, who's a democratic socialist. He's not a communist. I suppose reasonable people could disagree about that, but that's what he identifies as. He's competing for some of the working class people that Donald Trump thinks are his natural constituency. The MAGA brigade tends to be working class, marginalized economically. And so there's that going on. There may well be, I try not to get too deep into Donald Trump's mind. I don't want to occupy that space, but there may well be some racist and other sorts of prejudice, religious prejudice at work there as well. For whatever reason, Mamdani looms very large in Donald Trump's imagination. He would have to. The thought of Donald Trump endorsing Andrew Cuomo would have been unthinkable weeks,
Exactly.
months ago. And now he's, into Donald Trump, clearly the lesser of two evils by a large margin. So what happens in New York matters across the country, and what happens in New York matters a lot to Donald Trump.
It clearly does, because he's repeatedly issued threats to New Yorkers saying he's not going to give federal funds to New York City. He's even said in the past, we might have to take over the city if Zohran Mamdani, the 100% communist lunatic, wins the mayoral election. He's openly threatened to send in federal troops, something he's already done in other Democrat-run cities. The question is, if Zohran Mamdani does win this election, as most polls seem to suggest he will, does it mean that, New York City is going to be on the path of confrontation with the Trump administration? I mean, are we really going to see some tough days ahead for the people of New York? What can we expect?
Well, we can expect confrontation, but I think Donald Trump will lose that. He doesn't have the authority under the United States Constitution. He has no control over the purse strings. He executes the laws faithfully. He doesn't make the laws. So he's not in a position to simply turn off the spigot, as it were, and cut off federal funding to New York City. And many of the laws under which monies are granted from the federal government to the city have provisions that say explicitly you cannot use this as leverage for political reasons. So legally, he has no leg to stand on. It's worth pointing out in the sort of background information that tomorrow the Supreme Court will hear a case having to do with his constitutional ability to impose tariffs. And again, he's tried to muscle in on Congress's prerogatives, and I suspect the Supreme Court will slap him down. And if he tries this with New York, he'll get slapped down again. When it comes to the federalizing the National Guard is actually a state part of the United States military, but it can be federalized, and he has done that in other blue cities across the country. Good luck. The crime statistics in New York City are improving for a variety of reasons. And there's no appetite, I think, in New York City to have National Guard troops deployed in a police function. So if he thinks he's going to stare down Mamdani, good luck. He's likely to lose.
He's likely to lose. It does look like this could be a tough contest. Let's certainly hope that the people of New York do not end up paying a heavy price for it. For Andrew Cuomo to say, I am going to stand up to Donald Trump. It now sounds quite laughable given that Trump has openly endorsed him, something which, as you said, was unimaginable till a few weeks or months ago. I wonder how the Democratic Party looks at Donald Trump endorsing Andrew Cuomo, who could not even win the Democratic primaries against Zohran Mamdani. And what do you make of the fact that he decided to dump Republican Curtis Sliwa in this contest? Is it because he actually believes that Andrew Cuomo has a much better chance of defeating Zohran Mamdani?
I think so. The polls have tightened. Mamdani's lead is still significant, but it's less significant than it was a while back. And every vote that goes to Sliwa is a vote that's not going to go to Cuomo. So I think President Trump wants to prevent that splitting of the vote, as it were, the anti-Mamdani vote between these two candidates. Would it be enough? First of all, I doubt that Curtis Sliwa is going to withdraw. He's a fighter, whether you like his politics or not. I just don't see him backing out. But even if he were, would it be enough to put Cuomo over the edge? I don't think so. Andrew Cuomo is a very unpopular politician in New York State and in New York City. Um, Part of what's going on here, of course, is that the Democratic Party is divided. It doesn't know whether it should revert to its working class roots. It's always been the party in the past of the American working class, or whether it should be this kind of woke, upper middle class, progressive party, the Democratic Socialist sort of wing. And I don't think that has been sorted out. And I think that's one of the reasons why this election is so important. If Mamdani were to lose, that would augur poorly for that progressive middle class, upper middle class constituency. If he were to win, it would augur poorly for the working class that still identifies with the Democratic Party.
You know, since you are talking about the divisions in the Democratic Party, now that really is one of the biggest challenges that the party faces. And I think this is one election that has, in a sense, brought into sharp focus those divisions within the party. On the one hand, of course, you've had Bernie Sanders and AOC enthusiastically endorsing and canvassing for Zohran Mamdani. But on the other hand, you have a Barack Obama, former US president, one of the tallest leaders of the party, calling Mamdani and offering him guidance and praising his campaign, but stopping short of endorsing him. And then you have a Hakeem Jeffries who is asked, is Mamdani the future of the Democratic Party? And his answer is a categorical no. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's the struggle that I was talking about. Exactly. It's a struggle for the soul of the Democratic Party going forward. Is it going to be that party of the working class? And I think on the part of many leaders of the party, there's still that reflex. There's still that muscle memory. That's still where they want to be. And they don't really buy into some of the more progressive politics. But then there are those who see the party as exactly that, the vehicle for advancing a progressive social and cultural agenda that MAGA is definitely opposed to, but also many working class voters who are belong to the Democratic Party or identify with the Democratic Party. They don't like a lot of that politics either. So we're at a really important inflection point in the history of the Democratic Party and perhaps American politics.
It's very interesting you say that, because I've had guests come on my show and say exactly that this may well be an inflection point for the Democratic Party and American politics. Now, many have described Zohran Mamdani as a breath of fresh air. Some have drawn parallels between him and Barack Obama, even said this might be another Barack Obama moment for the Democratic Party, even though many in the party have been less than enthusiastic about his candidature. Are those parallels something you agree with? And correct me if I'm wrong. Since he was not born in the United States, Zohran Mamdani can't really run for president, can he?
No, he can't. No. And more broadly, though, I think there are some parallels. There's the youth factor. There's both candidates. Well, Barack Obama, when he was a candidate, Mamdani now, are outside of the kind of WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, once upon a time mainstream in this country. They come out of marginalized minorities in some ways, and they're slick in the sense that they're both very telegenic, both very articulate, both very intelligent. Even if you don't agree with them, you can't dispute that. Where they differ, I think, is that Mamdani is very, very inexperienced. And once upon a time, Barack Obama was too, but he got over that pretty quickly. Mamdani's sort of gaffes with respect to the sort of anti-Semitism, the Jewish vote, the way in which he talks about an intifada, his whole take on the Palestine-Israel conflict, has really alienated a lot of people in the Democratic Party as well, who don't see things quite that way. He's feeling his way. What are the various constituencies within the Democratic Party and beyond that he might tap into, and who is he going to have to abandon in order to appeal to that particular constituency? His inexperience has led him to make some missteps in that respect, and to say some things that have not gone down well, which he's had to retract and pedal away from.
You know, it's interesting that you've brought up some of the allegations that have been leveled against him. You're saying that because of his lack of experience, he's made some missteps. He's been accused of anti-Semitism, though he stands by most of the statements that he's made really about Israel and Palestine. He says he only supports the Palestinian cause and is critical of Israeli atrocities against Palestinians. But given that, there are divisions that we see, even in the Democratic Party, like you pointed out, as a result of his strong anti-Israel stance. And of course, we know that New York has the largest Jewish population in the world outside of Israel. Is this election likely to leave New York a deeply divided society if Zohran Mamdani were to win the mayoral election? Or do you believe he has it in him to be a bridge builder and a reconciler? A message that he has tried to send out in his campaign.
I think he's tried somewhat inelegantly and ineffectively. There are two diasporas, if I can frame them that way, that live in New York City that are tremendously important economically, but also politically. One of which is the Jewish population. The other is the Indian population. And he's managed to alienate both with his very stark pro-Palestinian stance that obviously appeals to that progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But he's also said some things which have been framed as characterized as Hindu-phobic, and he has been at meetings and not spoken out against people who were making Indophobic, I would call them, comments. And so he's managing to alienate two key cornerstone constituencies. Traditionally, they gravitated towards the Democratic Party. I don't think they're going to if he's in control. So if he had been a bit more experienced, he might have, whatever his personal beliefs, he might have framed them publicly in a way that didn't come across as so alienating. And maybe he'll grow into the role, but right now his foot, unfortunately, is in his mouth.
Okay, you believe his foot is in his mouth and he has alienated some important constituencies, maybe due to a lack of experience. But let me also ask you this, Professor Latham. I think it would be safe to say that in the run up to this election, we've seen some of the most vitriolic, racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic attacks being made on Zohran Mamdani by the MAGA crowd. I mean, some of them have asked for him to be stripped of his citizenship and be deported. And then, some have made references to 9/11 and, even said obnoxious things like he's going to cheer on another 9/11. This is the city that suffered 9/11. We don't want another one, but it could happen if Zohran Mamdani wins. Now, would you say that while racism and xenophobia are not exactly new to the MAGA movement, this election has probably brought out some of the worst of it?
I would agree. I mean, there's an old and inglorious history of racism in this country, and one would be a fool to ignore that. Things have we're getting, I think, better, to be honest. And now they flared up in a couple of different ways. The whole tariff thing with India and that Hindu-phobic uh, uh, reaction, I did not expect that, I have to say. As an immigrant to this country myself, I'm sensitive to some of these things, and I was not anticipating that, but it's happened. And it's not just the MAGA crowd, it goes beyond that, but we'll use that as a shorthand. The MAGA crowd really kind of took out all of the things they used to say about other groups and now applied it to Indian immigrants to this country. And then, of course, because Mamdani is a Muslim, dredging up some of that stuff around 9/11, and accusing him of being, unable to be a loyal American simply by virtue of his faith and cultural background. I had hoped that those days were going away and that we're in the rearview mirror, but this election has reminded me that they are part of the woof and warp of American political culture. And the words might change, but the song remains the same.
Very, very unfortunate indeed that those elements still continue to remain deeply entrenched in the American society and polity. Finally, let me ask you this question, Professor Latham. How high are the stakes in this election? And if Zohran Mamdani does go on to become the mayor of New York, what do you think is in store for the city? What can we expect?
Well, I think a lot of the things he is proposing are going to go nowhere fast. And I think there's likely to be an outmigration of people who are wealthy and skilled and connected and who can do their job from some other part of the country, whether it's Florida or Texas, someplace like that. Some of the things that he's talking about are simply not viable. Free public transit, for example. There's other issues with the public transit system in New York. The fares are not really one of them for most people. So I think if he manages to implement his policies, they are not going to work. They're not going to redound to the benefit of your average New Yorker. More likely, he won't be able to implement these policies because they're just too unworkable, and he's likely to run into all kinds of resistance. New York's been around for a long time. New Yorkers are a resilient people. New York will be there long after you and I have departed this earth. But it does go through better and worse phases. And I rather suspect that if Mamdani gets his way, it'll be one of the worst phases, not one of the better ones.
All right, you don't seem to be very bullish on Zohran Mamdani as mayor of New York. But, well, we will find out soon enough what the people of New York have to say and what fallout this high-stakes election is going to have, not just for the people of New York, but indeed for America at large. On that note, Professor Andrew Latham, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining me on Global Pulse.
Thank you.